All right, so welcome to this evening's session on co-creating change metrics with James here. We'll introduce nowish. I guess James, we've known for a few years in the Agile community around Sydney. He was at CommBank, I believe, some years back, Agile coach at Blackmores, and now at Elaborate as an Agile coach and lead consultant. And yeah, we've been looking forward to this for a while, actually, to hear from James about a topic we really haven't heard much about, I think, with the Sydney Scrum User Group. So would you like to all join me in welcoming James Harris?
Thanks very much, Ro. Thanks, everyone. I was excited to be invited to present tonight, and this is a presentation and session that's in the works for the upcoming Agile Australia conference as well. So you kind of get a sneak peek on what's going to be happening there down in Melbourne in October as well. This is all about co-creating change metrics, and we're going to dig into a few things related to how you go about co-creating change metrics. There is going to be a Mentimeter component. You're welcome to use the QR code now, or there will be opportunities to, throughout the presentation, link into Mentimeter as the questions come up. Oh. There we go. Okay, we've already done that. Just a bit about myself and Elaborate. I'm a lead consultant at Elaborate. I've got, as Rowan says, the background in a number of different industries, and I've had an opportunity over the course of my career to work as a developer in analytics and also as an Agile coach. And I've done a lot of stuff around enabling co-creation of sustainable change, and I've had an opportunity to experiment with different techniques in doing that. Elaborate, really what we believe is humanity's potential to achieve great things is constrained by yesterday's thinking. And we're continuously looking for better ways to enable organizations to challenge the impossible. We are a consultancy based in Brisbane, Melbourne, and Sydney, originating from Melbourne. What will you learn today from this session? Well, you'll learn about why a change community might be useful and how you could create one. You will learn all about how to establish a change vision that will enable the co-creation of change metrics. There will be some information about the 3 general stages of co-creating change metrics, and you'll find out some steps and techniques that'll allow your change community to come together and effectively create these metrics together. And also some of the 2 important feedback loops that you can put in place to enable your change community to inspect and adapt on these change metrics as well. Just a brief overview of the agenda tonight. We're going to talk about the T word. We're going to look at change communities. We're going to go over what a change vision is and how you create it. Then we're going to dig into the meat of the presentation and the session around co-creating change metrics, assessing fit for purpose, establishing cadences, and reviewing the fit for purpose. And we'll do a bit of a wrap up at the end of the summary. So let's talk about the T word. I'm going to go straight into a Mentimeter session on this. What 3 things do you think of when you hear someone say transformation? Probably the second most overused word behind Agile itself at the moment. So if you could all jump into Mentimeter, we're going to do a bit of a word cloud here and understand what 3 things people think of. And I'll switch across to the results. Let's find out what everybody says about transformation, or what they think about transformation. We've got huge change. Somebody likes to have a bit of an eye roll. Pain, not another change. Wow, there's lots of stuff coming in. This is amazing. No end state, buzzword, big bang. Oh no. Chaos, improvement. There's some real mixtures of positive and negative words coming in here. Restructure, resistance, waffle. Change is the resounding common word that seems to be getting picked up. Silver bullet and groundbreaking. Got a few more things coming in. Yeah, interesting. So that's really interesting. There's a really awesome mixture of positive and negative in here. Very cool. But the resounding word that comes to mind is change. I'll jump back across to the presentation. Change. So our context, when we talk about transformation, we commonly think of agile transformation. And really, when we talk about agile transformation, I like to consider this in a fairly complicated phrase of sustainable evolutionary adaptation capability focused around customer value delivery. And that's a massive mouthful, right? So for this presentation and this session, we are going to call it change, and we're going to consider it also as developing the ability to be really good at change. And what we'll talk about is how to co-create metrics that will guide change. And that does not have to be agile transformation. It could be any change you could use this process for. The first big question beyond that is, do you have a change community? And you're probably thinking to yourself, well, we don't call it a change community. Change communities go by many names. Let's talk about what a change community is. Change community brings together leaders at all levels in your organization around the desire to create change. These people are generally people with the ability to influence and inspire. And when you create a change community, that's also what you're looking for in the creation of it. These people are innovators and early adopters that often go by many names, such as change champions, agents, leaders, change ambassadors, change advocates. They're all innovators and early adopters, and they have an outcome creating mindset. Change community, all the people have sort of the well-being of the organization, its customers above their agendas. That's the ideal, and the ideal behind it as well is that it transcends any existing organizational hierarchy. They are ideals. It's not a perfect world, but that's kind of what we're looking for in a change community. They also have, they hold the trust and the idea of equal voice amongst themselves. A change community also can be quite large. So what we commonly find is there is also a core sort of community support team or a core change team that doesn't dictate or govern the direction of a change community, but facilitates the change community, facilitates the events that occur and the collaboration that occurs. In terms of why you should have a change community and the pros and cons associated with it, let's look at the advantages first. The advantages of having a change community in your organization is greater diversity of ideas and perspectives. They also enable you to generate a greater commitment to change. The change will become stickier if executed properly. They foster culture and mindset shifts more effectively in the organization, and they'll help you embed practices more effectively. But most importantly, the change community will allow you to cross Moore's chasm. They will let you get from the innovators and an early adopter stage into the early majority area with your change. There are some downsides to having a change community as well. People will recognize these common, I guess, shortfalls around it that can be mitigated with the appropriate actions and activities. It can take longer to make decisions. So the idea around that is the common quote of go fast and go alone, or go together and go far. They're sometimes susceptible to groupthink, as are many organizational structures. And often it's felt like the responsibility and accountability can be diluted in a change community. All of these things can be mitigated with the right actions and approaches, but that's not really the topic of this session today, and we're not going to dive any deeper into that. There's additional stuff that you can research and read about those things. How to start a change community. How would you start a change community in your organization? Here's some very high level steps that you can go about creating a change community. And these are inspired by Leading Change by John Cotter and the Open Space Agility Handbook by Daniel Mezek. First of all, we'd like to identify those who need to be invited into the change community. And going back to what I was talking about before, these are not necessarily people in power, but more people that have influence in your organization. The idea is to invite them in. You want motivated individuals that want to engage in the change community. And then what you'd be looking at is aligning and launching those individuals as a change community and bringing them together. Then the community and potentially the core group that sustains the community will nurture and grow that community. There'll be learning and adaptation that there needs to be built in to that community. And as you progress the change and as you reach your change goals, you want to celebrate and reward success in that community. Let's talk about the change vision now. So the change vision is the first big step to being able to co-create your change metrics. And we're going to do another Mentimeter around how was your change vision created. I just need to switch the slides, so just bear with me while I do that. And voting should be open in Mentimeter around this particular question. How was your change vision created? Did you co-create it together? Did you just get told what it was? Or do you not have a vision at all? And we respect the fact that there might not be some change happening in your organization currently, or you may not be involved with it. Yeah, okay. So we've got a trend towards the middle. I was told what the vision is. But interestingly, there's quite a good balance happening between co-created change vision and I was told what the vision is, which is interesting and quite awesome. Is it? I was expecting more of a trend towards I was told what the vision is. So this is really, really interesting. Okay. Before we dig into the change vision, I want to give an overview of the approach, the general approach that this whole process hinges on, and it is the double diamond approach. Diverge, converge twice. We start off with a change challenge. We diverge and discover perspectives converge around what the change vision is, and then diverge again around possible metrics, and then converge on the metrics that make sense and that are useful. Let's talk about aligning on a change vision, doing that initial discover to start to understand what the change vision could be. Before you can create your metrics, you need to have this change vision in place. And there's three really useful techniques, all oriented around futurespective, that can be used here to help your change community align on a change vision. The first is a futurespective around hopes and fears. This looks at what your change community hope for in achieving the change, and what are the fears, what's holding them back. The see, hear, feel, read futurespective syntax is, or structure, is more about understanding what they will see, hear, feel, and read when the change is realized in the organization. And then You've got also this concept around TRIZ. I don't know how many people have heard about TRIZ, but TRIZ is a really inventive problem-solving technique. It's part of liberating structures. And what you do in TRIZ is you visualize the awful future first. What could be the worst outcome? Then you think about all the ways that you could achieve that worst outcome. Then you identify all the possible things that you're doing that resemble those ways to achieve the outcome in your organization. Then think about what are the things that you can do to stop doing those behaviors or those processes. This can help provide perspective and insight as well into the change vision. So once we've sort of collected perspectives and ideas and aligned people more broadly around what everybody thinks, start to converge on what the change vision is. And the change vision, more than likely at this stage, won't be 100% perfect in the change community. But what we're looking for is a short aspirational statement that captures the long-term vision for the change that is desired. It needs to be imaginable, desirable, feasible, focused, flexible, and communicable. Shouldn't be too long or complex. And we need to try and capture the why in the statement as well. There's kind of a temptation when this becomes created by the change community for some people to go away and rework that vision because they don't really like it, or it's not really the result they were looking for. And we need to call out here that you need to resist that temptation or that urge to say, I don't really like this. Let's go away in a smaller group and rework this and come back and say what it is. Better to do it transparently with the change community as a whole. And of course, it is used to guide the co-creation of metrics. How would you converge on this? Well, one of the really effective techniques is using another liberating structure, 1, 2, 4, all. That can help mitigate any effects of hippos in the room, highest paid people's opinions. You can then collect all the possible statements, vote on them, potentially do some creative reframing techniques to reorient that statement. And the idea is that the change community lands on a statement that resonates with them and that they can communicate with the wider organization. We have an example one here. We're going to be using this one. It is, we want to deliver high quality product features faster to our customers and be able to respond quickly to their changing needs so they will never think of leaving us for our competitors. And we're going to leverage this statement for some examples further on. Let's get into the real purpose of this session, co-creating change metrics. Now that we understand about change communities, we understand about the change vision and why it needs to exist. This is a suggested process and set of steps that can be adapted by yourself for what works in your organization to enable the co-creation of change metrics with a change community using a change vision. The idea here is to bring your change community together in a set of workshops that works for your cadences to co-create the change metrics that you need and that work for you. The first step is a diverge around developing, and we look at the decisions that need to be made, the success indicators that show that the change has been successful, and then assess the information needs associated with those. Then we look at starting to converge around refining which of those information needs are suitable metrics. Start to look at classification and fit for purpose. And then finally, the third step is around delivering those metrics. So looking at the metrics cadences, the roles and responsibilities that need to be wrapped around implementing those metrics. And also, how do you review the fit for purpose over time of those metrics? And digging into the first part of this is usually the trickiest place to start because people just want to dig into the actual metrics that they want to use. And we're actually taking a step up from here before we dive down into what we're actually going to measure. What we want to start off with is brainstorming perspectives on two lenses here. The first is the decisions that we need to make, and the second is the high-level indicators of success for that change. And this would be a series of 2 brainstorming sessions followed by a minute affinity mapping and potentially some dot voting to identify 3 to 4 of the most important decisions that need to be made around the change and 3 to 4 of the most important success indicators for the change. I've given some examples here of what these might look like in the context of the example change vision. So in terms of decisions we need to make, some of the decisions that we might need to make in the context of the example change vision is you need to decide around how you prioritize customer needs. You need to decide about what's the trade-offs for quality versus speed of delivery. You may need to make a decision around what the optimal number of teams are to achieve your change vision here, which is delivering faster but high quality and responding quickly to changing needs. There's also a decision that needs to be made around what are the critical path activities to enable this change, and how do you decide on what they are? In terms of indicator success, some of the examples of indicators of success in this particular case are things like high customer satisfaction, reduced customer churn. You'd be looking at a faster time to market, and you'd also be looking on the quality sense, fewer support requests coming through. They're all examples of really high level items in here. And before we can start to jump into solutioning around what the metrics are, we need to assess what these are at a higher level in these 2 frames. The next step in co-creating a change metrics is to start to match up your information needs to these 2 frames. So matching up the information needs around your decision making, and also how you're going to measure your success indicators. So in order to establish how successful you've been, there may be more than one thing that needs to be measured, and there may be a continuum of a degree of success. Some of the things that you can do here are around doing some brainstorming for this, but also you start to get a bit of, again, a hippo effect potentially in the change community. And there's an option to use liberating structures such as 1, 2, 4 all or other mitigating activities that reduce the influence of particular people in your change community. Then you'd be looking at affinity mapping and dot voting these to try and reduce them into, I guess, a set of the most applicable ones that you need, but you don't want to reduce them too much at this stage. There's plenty of opportunities further on in this process to do the reduction as well. Some examples of information needs for decisions might be, in the case of prioritization of customer needs, things like the number of customer requests for particular features, the calculated or potential estimated production cost of delay of not doing this, not producing that particular feature, and looking at the value acquisition life cycle of that particular feature. How will you realize value? What will that value curve look like? Also, in the measures of success, an example of faster time to market could be things like looking at your release frequency, your lead time, calculating your flow efficiency of your throughput of work, looking at the defect rate or rework associated with your creation of your features. There are all some possible metrics that could be produced Then we want to start to refine these sets of metrics that we've dug down into to start to establish what are the important ones, what are really the important ones, what are the meaningful ones, what are the ones that make the most sense and are the most useful. And we start to converge using some activities such as looking at those metrics based on the leading or lagging and want or have continuums. And I've mapped this out in a XY axis as an example, placing each of those possible metrics in different quadrants based on how leading or lagging they are and whether we have the information that we need already or we want it and we need to go and figure out how we collect that information. This is, again, these are all activities that you could do very collaboratively in your change community. Once we've got a bit of a map there, we also can do a bit of a Moscow or similar sort of style analysis of those as well. So we sort of understand whether they're leading and lagging, whether we want them or we have them already. Now we can look at whether they're critical or they're just needed. They're nice to have or they're not really necessary. We start to refine what's important for us as a change community. Additionally, filtering further and refining down even more is then converging around what the fit for purpose for those metrics are. So are they actually fit for purpose, or is there some other issues they don't quite fit with what we need? And two techniques to do this additional stage is looking at the costs and benefits, but also the side effects that these metrics could cause in your organization. The side effects are important. If you put a metric in place, it will encourage particular types of behavior. And you need to be mindful of whether that behavior is useful or potentially destructive in some way, and whether or not it actually will complement your change effort. Also, we want to look at here, so you do that through brainstorming as a group and then potentially dot voting on the metrics that are really useful and starting to filter out those that aren't. But also, you want to assess whether or not the metric has the quality of good information. So some of these attributes may or may not be useful in your organizational context, but generally what I like to use is the idea of whether the metric is aligned to the change that you want to see, whether it's relevant, whether it's quantifiable, obtainable, can be accurate, is it actionable, and interestingly also, is it gameable by people? And can it be owned by somebody? So these are all interesting assessments that will allow you to filter down your potential change metrics into a smaller set. Ideally, out of this, you're looking to achieve a reasonably small set. Now, I can't say exactly how many you should have because it's contextual again, but ideally, as a rough guide, less than 10. But it really depends. The more you have, the more difficult it is for your change community and your organization or the more time consuming and resource intensive it is for your organization to collect those metrics. We want to talk about cadences. So the next step beyond refining is to deliver on your metrics. And the change community needs to come together and co-create also how they're going to deliver on these metrics and use them. What we're looking at here is aligning on the collection and inspection cadences of each metric that we've chosen. So to do this, we would use alignment readouts. And for example, here I've got readouts that are associated with monthly all the way down to more frequently in terms of collecting the data, and also monthly all the way down to more frequently around inspecting this data as well, or inspecting the metric. The interesting thing you see here is depending on the spread of where people put their sticky notes in a workshop like this. You can identify whether there's outliers in the room that really disagree and allow them to voice their input and opinions and perspectives around why they think so differently on these aspects. That can be useful and really helpful to ensure that everybody's bought in to what's agreed here in terms of actioning the metrics. We also have the need to really identify the roles and responsibilities around collecting and maintaining these metrics. So for example, you may identify a role of data analyst, and this could contain a number of responsibilities that are identified for this person to help maintain the change metrics that you need. Generally, it's a bit of a brainstorming session. My personal findings around this is probably one of the trickiest parts, because sometimes people don't want to put their hand up for these particular roles, and the importance around having people in your change community that can influence and provide the support necessary for these people to do these important jobs as part of the change effort is really, really useful. That's the first feedback loop, but we want to put a second feedback loop in place. This second feedback loop is really important for your change efforts. So the second feedback loop is looking at the actual metrics that you've selected, and then at a future time that's agreed on by the change community, coming back and checking whether those metrics are still useful for your change. Are they still based on what you've learnt over that period of time? Are they still being collected at a cadence that's suitable? Are they actually still relevant for your change effort? Do you need to adapt those sets of metrics based on what you've learnt over the period of the change execution? So there's a couple of things that you'd work into a workshop here. Identifying who needs to be involved in this review. Is there a core team of reviewers? Is there people that need to be consulted with? And is there people more broadly that need to be aware of adjustments in the metrics? And also aligning on how often you want to do this, because it's a relatively time-consuming operation to do this. So bring the change community together and align them on whether they want to do this something like annually, biannually, quarterly. When you start getting down to fortnightly, monthly, and weekly, it starts to become possibly a something that you may be adapting too often, but you may feel like you want to check frequently and not necessarily adapt as frequently. All right, so that's essentially the overall process by which you can go about co-creating change metrics in a change community around a vision. And it's not a prescribed process, it's an adaptable process. You may find that certain things can be used, certain things are not necessarily useful in your organizational context. But what it allows you to do is it allows you to bring people together to align and agree on what the vision and the metrics are, so that they can go to other people in your organization and they can explain why it's happening and why they're measuring these particular things. If you're part of a change community, or if you're just part of an organization and you get told, I just need you to measure this and report back, and you have no idea why you're doing it, then how can you get behind that change? How can you explain to others why you're collecting this? It's just, as far as you're concerned, going to a black hole somewhere and something's happening to it. The real value of doing this is it generates change advocates all the way through the organization and allows them to really, really get involved with the sense and respond activities associated with the change at all levels, to enable them to, I guess, come together and really, change direction and pivot on a change based on what everybody's finding, but also it makes that change really, really sticky. So what we've covered tonight, just a big summary of it. We've covered the change community. We've covered why you might need a change community, how you can create a change community, identify, invite, align and launch, nurture and grow, learn and adapt, celebrate and reward. We've made the point that the change community will help you cross Moore's chasm to get to that early majority stage. We've visited the core concept of the process around the double diamond approach, diverging and converging, diverging and converging again. And what I've taken you through tonight is a general flow of how you can co-create metrics based on a change vision. So look at the decisions that will need to be made, look at the indicators for success, start to identify the information needs around those things. Then classify them as metrics, potential metrics, assess their fit for purpose. And then once you've got a core set of metrics, understand what your collection and inspection cadences are, what your roles and responsibilities are going to be, agree on them as a community, and then understand when you're going to come back at a later stage and check on whether they're still useful or not. I have some reading here as well that may be useful if you'd like to dig a bit deeper on some of the concepts that I've brought up tonight. But essentially, I would like to thank everybody for joining this session tonight. And I hope that you've got a lot out of this, and also this has spurred some additional, I guess, ideas and questions. And I'd like to open it up to the group now for a discussion and conversation and questions.
Excellent. So first off, before we kick off the Q&A section, I'll just a round of applause for James. A lot of nuggets.
Thank you, James. Awesome.
Thank you, everyone.
Excellent. So we're on to question time now. So like with everything, very similar to the starts of auctions, there's always a little bit of quietness at that, that sort of beginning, and it starts to ramp up. So does anyone have a question they'd like to ask James just to start off the conversation? And if you don't make that first one, please add your questions to the chat.
I can start, if that's okay. It's Nancy here.
Hi, Nancy.
Oh, did you want me to add it into the chat? Sorry.
Oh, no, please go ahead, Nancy.
Sorry, I wasn't following your direction.
No,
James, what about situations where you go to say, look, why are we making this change? And the group gets stuck. Have you been in a situation like that where that higher level is they just haven't thought about it? And how have you gotten past that?
Yeah, so I've encountered a situation where when you start to look at the decisions and the key success indicators, the group goes straight into the things that they want to measure. Like they already have the solution in their head. It's not necessarily a stuckness, but it's more an alignment issue. Everybody's sort of got their own ideas of what they want to do.
Yeah.
And that can sometimes take a little while, and it can cause a bit of frustration. What I've found is that if you spend a good deal of time and effort with the change vision, that should be mitigated to a certain extent. But it also, I guess, relies on the engagement of the people in the change community. In terms of what you can do, well, if they do get stuck, you can pull out additional facilitation techniques to start to unpack things a bit more. So I haven't needed to go too far into additional facilitation techniques, because what I found is the groups that I've been working with have sort of sat in their stuff and pulled through. But you may want to look at potentially some other liberating structures, or you may want to look at, I guess, allowing people to break and come back, or share different ways that they like to reflect and think, because some people are reflective thinkers, and they may just want to think about it for a while. So sometimes stopping the session and coming back at a later stage is also a good tactic.
Thanks, James.
So we've got a question from Madhu. So how to deal with leaders who see co-creation as a waste of time?
Yeah, so this process is not for organizations that are led by people like that. And if they consider it that it is not for them, then my general feeling is that don't push the system. This is not the process for them. And my question to them would be, would you be open to experimenting with something new?
Madhu, does that answer your question, or is there anything else that you're looking to explore?
Yeah.
Yeah, it answers my question.
I can add some color to it. I was working with an organization a little while ago where I did exactly that, respected the environment, and because the environment wasn't too open for co-creation, I went with the answers. So I said, oh, these in my suggestion would be good metrics to look at. The effect, however, was that having the discussion on those suggestions took approximately, or perhaps more time than it would have taken to co-create it together. So the whole concept of we don't want to co-create it because it's a waste of time wasn't valid. But this is how the organization rolled. This is how they wanted it. They wanted to, have some answers and then have a discussion on this, instead of saying open with a blank canvas and let's co-create together. So sometimes what you need to do is you also need to look at the culture of the organization a little bit and say what would help them, a 2-degree shift in their perspective to kind of get to the stage where they want to get to, and instead of always saying, as James said, don't push it if the culture is not like that.
Yeah, it's really an assessment of looking at, when you look at it as from an empathy perspective, there's something going on there. They're feeling very impatient. There's other things that need to be dug into in the system as a coach before they're ready to do this co-creation thing. And it's a question of readiness and receptiveness to do this. Yeah.
Thanks for the question, Madhu. So we've got a question from Tim on groundwork. So Tim, if you're on the call.
Yeah, and great presentation, James. Really, really enjoyed it.
Thanks, Tim.
My question was around, do you ever factor in an education process for the change champions sort of at the start of that process? I've been in some situations where the leaders have got a change in mind, perhaps agile or DevOps adoption or something. The problem statement might be something around, IT productivity or something. And you kind of, you might pull together a group of people who actually aren't that well educated on perhaps the way at least the leaders want to go in solving that problem.
Yeah. So it's a good question. We have a tendency to do a senior leaders training in Elaborate to set up the leaders around the agile mindset and things like different types of thinking around creative leadership mindsets rather than reactive leadership mindsets. Also with the more broader community members doing things like Agile 101 training and things like that so that they understand the different mindset. I tend to explain the possibility around doing this and the benefits that it could bring around the change being more sticky, it having more longer term effect in terms of embedding the change in the organization. It doesn't promise success though, and it's not a straight line from here to there. They may end up in a completely different place than the change they're actually intended to do. But that change through this co-creation process, I always envision will be better than what they originally set out to achieve because of the ideals that are associated with setting up the change community.
Thank you. Great
answer. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. You know, I think some of it comes down to problem formulation or challenge formulation as well. If someone has an answer in mind, they may not think enough about the actual challenge to put to the change community. Yeah. So the change community goes off in a direction that sort of might be appropriate for the problem as stated, but actually the problem as stated possibly doesn't fully encapsulate what the leaders had in mind. So I think the importance in formulating that challenge is there as well.
And that's a really positive thing. Let me just call out that challenging, like looking at the challenge statement and you do a bit of work on it, understand it a bit more, and then coming out and saying, I don't think this is the right challenge statement. That can be really powerful to come back and say, we've learnt a whole heap more, and actually this other challenge statement is actually what we need. And that should be totally something that is completely open.
That's great.
To do in a change community.
Excellent.
Yeah.
Thank you, Tim. So next question is from Carolyn. So any hints, tips for organizations that are immature where metrics are not common and seen as extra work?
Yeah, this is something that you need to start small with, right? It's similar to piloting agile teams and things like that we see in organizations. Is start with experimentation around understanding the benefits of metrics and what they can bring to maybe a small area of the organization or a team. We're thinking about the bubble approach here. Start with a small bubble, and then that bubble slowly starts to expand over time in the organization. Yeah, the whole extra work, not enough time, we don't have resources, we can only commit 10% of somebody's 120% allocation to what they do already. Can be a tricky one to overcome. Just got to identify the places where there is a desire to change in the organization. As a coach, talking to people and understanding where is the desire to change in the organization. Does that answer your question?
Have you found what you're seeking?
Thank you. It just means it's going to take a lot longer than I might like it to, but thank you for the encouragement and the motivation to actually try. So much appreciated.
Not at all.
Thank you, Carolyn. So we've got a question on change communities from Joe. So if you're still on the line, please fire away.
Hey, thanks, Derek. Thanks, James, for the informative presentation. I'm wondering if you've ever created a change community or any other community like a Scrum community where you've got to nurture and grow. You've gone through those steps, which are, really valid, and we've been through them, but no one steps in and it looks like it will die. So even a pair of people or a trio don't step in to energize and lead that community, and it's been left with you if it's going to continue. And if so, how have you helped people take on the community and bring it to life?
Yeah.
Or do you let it die?
It's a good question. So I'll use a metaphor around facilitation of groups. for this, right? And there's also additional context here as well. When you're facilitating a group of people, quite often silence is really, really useful in that facilitation because it creates the space for people to think and do what they need to do. There is also that, as a facilitator, you're really sort of, your brain is burning. You're going, I just want to say something. I just want to, and you've got to train yourself to hold back just that extra few seconds because everybody else in the room is thinking the same thing. All right. The same thing kind of applies for the change community. Is sometimes you get this inertia that happens. It's just, it feels like it's going to die. You're not growing. It's not, the momentum is not building. Sometimes it just takes maybe that extra few days or that little bit of conflict to occur around somebody saying, I don't like what's happening here, and I'm going to jump in and do something about it. It's possibly a way up of, are you advocating responsibility versus trusting the fact that the group has the ability to come in at the last possible responsible moment and jumpstart the thing again. You may have to resign yourself to the fact that it is going to die. And then the celebration there is around the learning. Why did it die? Let's learn about why it didn't work. And that's all gold as well. But it may be disappointing for the organization, and particular people may not be happy and they may look at it as a failure. So it's about reframing that away from a failure to what did we learn, and hey, it's still there. We just need to inject new life into that.
I love that response about celebrating and learning why it might die. And so I'll take that on. Let's celebrate. We didn't get this off. Last week I learned that fail actually means first attempt in learning.
That's great. Yeah.
So taking those forward, and yeah, you do learn something from it. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you.
The failing like that could give greater insights into your organization and its mindset and what needs to change than it would if the change initiative was to continue sometimes.
True. Thank you.
Thank you for your question, Joe. So, folks, we don't have any more questions in the chat. I think just looking at the time, we've probably got about time for maybe one or two more. So we'll just open the floor. Are there any final questions for James?
I've got one that I'm curious as to if anyone's got an answer to this one. Have you come across a good overall metric for cost of change, or even just a set of various things to look at to assess the cost of change in different dimensions?
Is that for me or the group?
Anyone really. I just think it's one of the things I find, because it's pretty easy to look at lead time or cycle time. I don't really talk about specific metrics too much here, but yeah, the cost of change to contribute to agility seems to be something that people don't measure particularly well, in my experience. Maybe technical debt could be just one dimension of it, but the ability to actually change direction with your product backlog, or to be able to plan something completely different, pivot, change direction.
What would jump to my mind would be why are they wanting to do that specific change? And I suppose we'll go down that road to then find out what's the benefit and how do they know, and that benefit is obviously the end goal, and maybe that's how they're going to measure it. So go agile, whatever that means to certain companies, then ask them, well, why do they want to do that? Or find out that reason, or well, our customer keep on losing customers, so then maybe measure that. It's a really difficult one when it's sort of an open broad, because any change, we want people to be happier. What's the cost?
Yeah. That happiness comment is actually really important. So there is a mental cost of change to your workforce in an organization. They have the idea of change burnout or change fatigue, right? Every time change occurs in an organization, it takes cognitive load on the people in that organization to create that change. And there's probably indirect ways to measure that, Rowan, although I have not explored that in detail.
Yeah. I've not explored it either, but listening to some of the people kind of reminds me of the integral quadrant. So you probably would want to look at what impact does it have on the mindset? How does it change the culture? What exhibitable practices change, and what is the cost of that change, and what does that mean in terms of the policies of the organization, or what does that change? So maybe measuring all of them. So it's not a single metric, I would imagine, but a few things.
Thank you.
Oh, we've got a question from Sam. Sam, if you're still on the call, floor is yours.
Yeah, hey guys, great to be here, and James, thanks for the preso. It's been great to sit here and listen in. This isn't directly related to change metrics, but just listening to you talk, you mentioned facilitation techniques quite a few times, and I was just wondering if it's possible for maybe you to circulate one or two books or articles that might dive into some of your go-to techniques. I think it could just be a really good piece of info for us to sink our teeth into.
Yeah, some of my techniques have just been learnt over time, but one thing that I find really, really useful in facilitation is clean language, and I use it quite a lot. It's a systemic modeling technique similar to ORSC, and I really encourage, if you're interested in facilitation techniques, to look at the clean language stuff. John and Sarah gave a Sydney Scrum user group session it would have been about six months ago or so now, about clean language. But I tend to use a lot of those questions in clean language in my facilitation sessions to create space.
Awesome.
Yeah, thanks for the reminder.
Yes,
we may have a video of that
share.
session floating around that we haven't posted yet. I'll look into that.
Let me just dig up the link while I'm listening in.
Excellent. So just looking at the time, I think we've reached the end of our Q&A session. So over to you, Rowan.
Yeah, let's thank James once more, and thanks to everyone for raising questions too. Would you like to put your hands together and see my? Yeah, thank you.
Thanks so much.
Yeah, thanks heaps for doing this.
It's a pleasure. Absolute pleasure. Thanks for having me.